Hello, welcome back to Retro Recon. It's good to see everyone again. Today we're going to talk about a survivor. At first I was afraid, I was petrified that I could not live without you by my side. You know, all that good stuff. I will survive. Yeah, yeah. All right, I can't sing, but Catherine Parr was a survivor. Now, interesting thing that I have found is, I study history. I think that's pretty clear. It's what I do. I teach history. It's a it's just a really fun thing for me. I mean, I think everybody can sort of figure that out. But the more that I look at things, especially like I'm doing a class right now at UAB Honors College, shout out, that is on Henry VIII and his six wives. Now, of course, you do, all kinds of research into these people if you want to present them in class. So you read, you find out everything you can, and it never ceases to amaze me. Just when you think you know everything, you know nothing. I mean, that's a fact. If you ever meet anyone who claims they know everything, they're an absolute idiot because there's no way you can know everything. So I found something out the other day and I didn't know it. So I wanted to do a podcast about it. Plus, it just so happens that this will fall into one of those, this happened on this day in history. And this happened, or at least began, on the day that I'm recording this particular episode. Isn't that something? Right? That's pretty cool. So on September the 5th, 1548, way back when, right? Way back in the Tudor era of England, Catherine Parr dies. Yes, she is the survivor, right? Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Catherine Parr is the survivor. She sees Henry buried, right? Finally, we get rid of the old man, right? Now, the interesting part about Catherine Parr, there's a lot you can talk about. I mean, she was an amazing woman all the way around. But what we're going to get into today is kind of what happened to her after she died, right? Her life after death, so to speak. But before we get to that, let me give you a little background so you'll understand, exactly, how she ended up where she did when she was buried. Okay. All right. So after Henry dies, Catherine Parr marries Thomas Seymour. Thomas Seymour, probably she had, been in love with this guy for a long time. Truth be told, she likely was involved with him before she married Henry. Now, Thomas Seymour is the uncle of the now King Edward VI, right? Okay, all right. So they marry, they're together. Also, interestingly enough, residing in the house with them is one Elizabeth Tudor, also Elizabeth the First, right? Who's going to be Queen Elizabeth of the Elizabethan era. She's there with them, which that's going to be an important thing, as we go forward here. It's going to be a pretty important factor, right? Okay, so they're all living together. Thomas Seymour, Catherine Parr seem happy. Catherine Parr actually becomes pregnant, right? And so while she is pregnant, okay, now here's where it gets interesting. While she is pregnant, allegedly, Thomas Seymour begins to take up with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is, a teenager. I mean, young teenager, 14, maybe 13, 14, somewhere in there. Could be a little older, but around, mid teens. So Thomas Seymour ends up spending a lot of time with Elizabeth, and the rumors just were flying around that they were having a relationship. Now, here's the thing. Catherine Parr, of course, doesn't believe this, but eventually she discovers the two together, or discovers Thomas in Elizabeth's bedroom. Bum, bum, bum. Now, this happens while she's pregnant. She's very upset. So what is she going to do? Well, she kicks Elizabeth out. So she runs Elizabeth off, right? Because, that's, I guess, what you do. She's not going to blame the man because it's not his fault, I guess. So Thomas Seymour, escapes, potentially abusing a young lady. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different stories about the relationship between Thomas Seymour and Elizabeth. I don't, there's no way to prove any of it, but they clearly had somewhat of an affinity for each other from pretty much everything that I've looked at. All right, so now The next thing that happens is Catherine will give birth to her daughter, Mary. She gives birth to her daughter, Mary, on August the 30th, 1548. Okay. Now, on August the 30th, she gives birth. It's a joyous day, right? Now, the problem is it is in, now as it was then, childbirth is a risky proposition all the way around. So Catherine has complications from the childbirth. And, unfortunately, a few days later in September the 5th, she passes away and she dies. Now, they kind of bury her quickly. So she is put, she's basically buried rather quickly in Sudley Castle is where that she is laid to rest. It's kind of quick. Now, when they do it, though, they wrap her up in this lead covering. I mean, they cover her up in like wax and lead and all kinds of stuff. I mean, they cover her up, they bury her, they like almost mummify her, right? They bury her. Okay, now Catherine is dead. She's buried. Before I go on to tell you about what happens to Catherine after she dies, let me back up a little bit and tell you what happens to Thomas Seymour, because I can't leave this out, because this guy, I'm gonna tell you. All right, so already Thomas Seymour, has allegedly had a relationship potentially with Elizabeth, the future queen. Also, his nephew is the King of England, Edward VI. Now, his brother Edward is the Lord Protector, right? So the two of them, after Catherine dies, they have this power struggle on who's going to be in charge of the king, or at least Thomas wants there to be a power struggle. There's not really. I mean, sort of. But anyway, so while Edward is away fighting the Scots, the dreaded Scots, you know, he's fighting out, all fighting the Scots. This is when Thomas decides to make his move. He starts saying, "Hey, I should be in charge. This should be me doing this. I'm the Lord High Admiral of the Seas," which he was. He had control of the Navy, so to speak. So as these things go, if you have control of a branch of the military, I mean, you have a little bit of power, right? Okay. So he's thinking, I can make a move here. So he tries to, sway some people his way. He puts the word out there. And then he's thinking, well, you know what? I'll even get, not only the Navy involved, I'll go out and get some pirates to help me, which he does. He actually, he's out there with, drink up me hotties, yo ho, he's out there getting the pirates to help him. It all kind of falls apart. It's not really a cohesive kind of plan, right? I wouldn't say that Thomas is the sharpest tool in the shed, because what he does next will prove that. So, for an unknown reason, right? I mean, even his brother tries to help him and say, look, man, you got to chill. I mean, basically, let's call a meeting. You've got to stop, because this is not going to end well for you. But, Thomas doesn't pay any attention to this. So he decides that he's going to go to Hampton Court and sneak in. And, well, they don't. All right. So they think maybe he was going to kidnap the king, Edward VI, who was at Hampton Court at that time. So he's going to go to Hampton Court. He's going to take the king. We don't really know what his plan was, but he shows up at Hampton Court and tries to sneak in the king's apartment, right? Now, unfortunately for him, the king had these spaniels, these dogs that were barking at him just incessantly. You know how these little dogs will rip, 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 rip? That's basically what's happening. So as he's coming up to try to sneak in to take the king or do whatever he had a plan to do, these dogs were barking. So he decides that, he's going to, kill one of these dogs. So he does. He shoots the king's dog. Terrible idea. I mean, if you shouldn't mess with anybody's dog, but especially the king's. So he shoots the king's dog. This ends terrible. Of course, this wakes everybody up. He gets caught. He gets charged with treason. Now, all right. So now it's all, he's in a lot of trouble. They even try to implicate Elizabeth in this plan, right? Because Cat Ashley, who took care of Elizabeth, was actually implicated as well. Anyway, long story short, Elizabeth is really smart. She never admits to anything. So whether or not she was involved or not, who knows? But they weren't able to charge her with anything, because she's too smart for that. But Thomas Seymour is an idiot. So Thomas Seymour, and no offense to anybody who is a descendant of Thomas Seymour, I'm sure he was a great guy to be around. Whatever, I don't know, but anyway, they end up cutting his head off Tower Hill, Tower of London. So he meets an unfortunate end. Poor Thomas Seymour, right? So anyway, that was Thomas Seymour. He's dead. Now let's go back to what happens with Catherine Parr, because this part is just all right. So Catherine Parr lays there for a couple hundred years, almost 250 years. She is undisturbed at Sudeley Castle. Now the problem was, of course, as I mentioned, Thomas Seymour, he had kind of a pretty hard downfall. So his properties and things like Sudeley Castle kind of fell in disrepair. There wasn't a lot that they were doing with it. The roof fell off of the chapel where Catherine was buried. So after 250 years, I mean, there's not a lot there. So some guy comes around. This is the first story. This guy comes around 1782. He comes around and finds. Now, some people say they were looking for it. Other people said that it was just an accident, depending on which narrative you read on this. But he finds Catherine Parr's remains, and boy, let me tell you something. He digs these things up. She's only buried 2 feet, right? She's only 2 feet under the ground, which is not deep enough by any stretch of the imagination. That's why they say, 6 feet under is kind of that's, but for some reason, it's just 2 feet. They hastily put her 2 feet under. Now, so what happens is she is disturbed for the first time in almost 250 years. And what he finds, now, the first thing he does is he makes an incision around her. It was her arm or her face or somewhere where she was covered in this lead and wax, right? He makes an incision and he sees her flesh, and it is white and moist and almost, supple, so to speak, right? So it's literally like she had just died yesterday. I mean, she is remarkably preserved, right? So he decides, well, whoa, this is wild. So, of course, as you would do if you dug somebody up, he decides to take a lock of her hair and a tooth while he's there for good measure. And these you can still see today. If you go to Sudeley Castle and tour it, they have it right there. You can check it out. It's a tourist attraction to see the hair and tooth of Catherine Parr. So, all right, so he does his thing and he kind of puts her back, right? So he's done. Now, she is disturbed several more times. One of the first times after that, they find her, and it could be a group of like aristocratic women who were wanting to see the late queen. This was shortly after the first disturbance. And they have found that when they find her this time, she has a really, awful smell, and she is clearly starting to decompose. Her body is in like advanced decomposition at this point, and it's really it's pretty nauseating to the ladies and everything. So they don't really they look at her and they see that she's not what she was reported to be previously. So they put her back, and then they move on about their daily lives, right? So and then all right, so in the meantime, some more people come by and they dig Catherine up. I mean, there's not really a good idea of how many times this happens. But in one case, they actually dig her up and they leave her on like a trash heap, literally a trash heap. So people walk by and there's like a trash heap, rubbish, waste, and there's Catherine Parr, queen, right? Her body just laying there, just hanging out. And it's like finally people are like, we got to do something about this. We need to put her back in there. So there's some grave diggers that are hired to do this. And these guys, I can't say, I can't recommend them. So if you were looking for a, competent, maybe bonded grave diggers, these are not your guys. Because that man, so there undoubtedly, and there always is a market in things like this, right? They love the macabre, and they love to, get pieces of things that they think are, I don't know, special. I mean, you hear people buying locks of hair, and who knows what all people will actually purchase. So these guys are kind of entrepreneurial in a way, because what they do is they start taking pieces of the poor queen. They start knocking her teeth out. They take, they take teeth. They take, body parts. They may have like actually taken her arm out of the socket. They've done all kinds of things that are, whatever the remains that are left at this point, they're removing a lot of her parts to sell, and people are buying it. So there's a market for it. These guys are not the greatest. And then to top it all off, after they, dig this grave finally deeper, I guess, than it was before the 2 feet. They take all their teeth. They take, anything they can pull off of the poor woman, right? Then they decide they're going to bury her upside down. So they bury her upside down, face down in this grave, and that's where they leave her. So finally, she is discovered once more. And then, there is a guy who's in charge of the grounds there at Sudley Castle. And he says, we really need to do something with the queen here. We need to make sure that she is put to rest finally. So around let's see, it's 1817. Yeah, 1817, they bury her officially, right? Where you can find her today. If you go to Sudley Castle today and you find her, this is where that she is, her final resting place. Now, unfortunately, by this point, I mean, she started off almost perfectly preserved. It's like one of those things that, you see, it's unbelievable that, I mean, it's probably how they prepared her body that really did it, and maybe the environment that she was buried in. But she goes from this perfectly preserved remains to almost just dust, a few bones. I mean, there's really nothing left, because, the grave diggers came in, they took stuff. I mean, other people that came by took stuff. They threw her on a pile of trash for a while. So it's no surprise that there wasn't much left when they finally put her in her final resting place, which they finally did. They finally buried her, and that is where she is today. So, Catherine Parr ended up as being, which is a significant thing, the fact that Catherine Parr was the survivor of the 6 wives, that this was her end, right, is pretty terrible. I mean, you have, she marries Thomas Seymour. Thomas Seymour has eyes for Elizabeth, may have had a relationship, or at least he was inappropriate with Elizabeth at the very least, right? So he does these things. She's pregnant at the time, which is just like, you're pregnant, your husband is doing whatever, right? And then she has this baby that she's been waiting for forever, and it names her Mary, right? Named after the future queen, Mary, Bloody Mary, names her after her. And then within a few days, I mean, she has complications and she dies, which is just so tragic for someone who was an amazing woman all the way around. I mean, she did more to help the future queen regnants of England than, you could put her right up there. I mean, they learned how to be a queen from her, really, because of the way that she, handled herself, especially when Henry was away. She was able to kind of run things, and she was really good at what she did. And Mary and Elizabeth both observed this, saw it, and were able to learn exactly how to be a real queen. So, Catherine Parr was a very impressive woman. She did a lot of religious writing. She almost got in trouble with Henry for this because some people tried to get her in trouble, but she was smart enough to, kind of, heap praise and on Henry and say, "Oh, we love you, Henry. You're so amazing, and I'm so sorry," and this and that and the other. So she was very smart, a brilliant woman who unfortunately met it was a sad end right after she has her child. And if anybody is curious about her daughter, Mary Seymour, she probably dies very young. She's kind of lost to history in a large sense, but they think in all likelihood she probably died relatively young, maybe not. I mean, before she reaches her teenage years. So there wasn't. She didn't live like a very long time. They don't think. So Catherine Parr, the survivor of the divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. She was the survivor, and unfortunately, after she died, they threw her in the ground really fast. And people, it took a while, a few hundred years, right? Um, but they ended up, disturbing her. I think that probably the most symbolic thing was the way that she was preserved at first. And you can see that. Well, I mean, you can see the lock of hair and the tooth if you so choose. I don't know. That seems, I don't know. Anyway, pretty cool. I guess if they ever go all Jurassic Park, they could theoretically clone her, bring her back. I guess. I don't know. I mean, don't know that would be a good idea either. Anytime they start doing that cloning stuff, I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've seen Jurassic Park and I don't want a velociraptor coming after me. So I think I'll pass on all that. You can't play God, right? But anyway, that is what happened to Catherine Parr on this day, exactly 477 years ago, September the 5th, 1548, almost 500 years ago, she passes away. And that only is the beginning of the journey of her life after death, right? Because boy, it was something else. But so recently I did went down a rabbit hole on this, and I wanted to share today on the day, right? So on this day in history. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time.